So good morning, everyone. My name is Glenn Gruber. We're gonna do some introductions of the folks here on the stage in a minute. Really looking forward to this panel. I've been running the ETC with Maribel for the last couple of years, as she mentioned, and really glad to see like some significant growth, in the membership over the last couple of years, and hopefully that continues to lead to even more dialogue. One of the things I've always really liked about the idea of the ETC is that it's about like experiential learning, where we have a chance to learn from each other and share kind of what's going well, what's not going well, and if I have a question about a certain technology, maybe someone else around here can help. So we're hoping to replicate a lot of that type of dialogue here today, kind of give you a little bit of insight into how that goes, and hopefully you will click on the link and join. So we've got 4 great members on the panel here today of the ETC. I'm going to have them, we'll start with a little bit of introductions. So first we'll start with Myckel Haghnazari. That's the one that's taken me the hardest one to say. So, Myckel's from Flex. Then directly to the left, and I'll ask you guys to do a little bit of your own introductions. We have Melanie Seekins from Altria, followed by Belding, who many of you know from BCG. And then last, but certainly not least, someone that I've gotten to know a little bit over the last several weeks, Dumiak from Allstate. Thank you. Okay, so Myckel, why don't you just start with a quick introduction of kind of what you do?
Sure. So Myckel Haghnazari, that's the easiest one to say, right? I'm a director at a company called Flex, and just as an intro to Flex, Flex is a sketch-to-scale supply chain solutions company. And what that really means is basically we do anything from design all the way to logistics and manufacturing for pretty much any company out there that's out there. And I handle anywhere from outside in, I would say the www.flex.com all the way to the mobile, web, e-learning, and a few other areas within Flextronics.
Okay, cool. Melanie?
So I'm Melanie Seekins. I'm a mobile engineer at Altria. We've been dealing with a lot of change, going from Good over to AirWatch. It's been a very tumultuous 2 years, but we're finally getting to where we want to be. And on a side job, I actually am the board chair for an organization called CMDSP. I encourage everyone in this room to check us out because it's a first certification for anybody who's a mobile engineer, architect, and in the mobile industry. So I highly recommend checking us out.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Belding. I work for BCG. By the way, we're hiring, in case anyone's interested in changing careers. So I run a team called Intelligent Computing, and we basically have all of the devices and endpoints, all the identity stack, and the productivity pieces. And I just poached Steve, who, if I could see him, he's over there. So welcome aboard. We are in an interesting spot because about 70 to 80% of our employees are on the road 70 to 80% of the time. So we're about as mobile as anybody could possibly be, and yet we have a long way to go in our journey. So I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about that. Okay. Thanks for joining. I know it's early.
So my name is Dumiak, and I'm Director of Technology Innovation for Allstate Insurance. Just as a form of background, I started at Allstate as an app developer, moved into the infrastructure side where I did databases, network, middleware, moved back into application development, then into architecture, and finally they threw me into this group called Technology Innovation, which is really responsible for end-to-end innovation at Allstate. So all the way from idea capture, being able to categorize it, prioritize it, and report back on it, out to doing POCs and market tests with some of the technologies that we'll talk about today.
Okay, awesome. So, and I promise that that's the last time that you're going to see me just go kind of up and down the aisle here. I kind of hate when that happens, so we're going to just try and mix it up with different folks. So, it's been about 10 years, since the iPhone. So 10 years since we've been doing kind of mobile as we know it now. And it's kind of completely transformed how most people live. We all know all of that. But the impact in the enterprise has been slightly more modest, than it's been throughout just kind of consumer use. So like according to Aperian's 2017 Executive Mobility Report, only 3 out of 10 enterprises have deployed more than 10 apps, which is really, and probably some of that's like email and SharePoint and other stuff that's not maybe completely useful, or not the way that we think about apps, at all. So, we've still got a long way to go, I think, is the good way to say about it. And all of us are trying to lead our companies a little bit faster and further. But we still have made some good progress. So let's kind of take stock of where we are. And one of the things that we're kind of all tasked with here is to stand up, in many cases, mobile as like a fundamental technology for the company. And that's hard because half the time you come in and there's like 17 different like little projects going on, and people are doing it in 47 different ways, and it's hard to really scale and build that as a technology that we can all count on and scale across the enterprise. So, maybe we can just start with, I'll ask a couple of you guys, and maybe Melanie, you can kick us off.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your mobile journey, like what's happened at Altria so far?
Well, at Altria, many years ago, we actually had BlackBerry, and of course, it was a huge boat anchor. It was an antiquated technology. You could never do mobile applications with it. So what we ended up doing is we ended up with a technology, obviously good, because nobody wanted to use BlackBerry anymore. They wanted a device that had more functionality, your Palm, your Windows devices. And that was in the enterprise for a very long time. But you could never do mobile applications. You couldn't do anything more with it just because their ecosystem was so small. So when they started to look at evolving and where we could go, we actually went with AirWatch. And AirWatch allows us to do so much more. We have the collaborative tools. Boy, I can't even type this morning. You also have the ability to release applications. You can wrap applications. Everything goes in one place. It's all in a protected bubble if you want to go that route. But it allows us to do a lot more than we could before. And this makes our infrastructure better. It makes our people more productive. And it also means that our manufacturing centers can do what they want to do. They can check equipment. They can do the Internet of Things. They can put beacons on certain places in the factory and be able to pull up the right time information. And it's been a great thing for us, but we're still learning. We actually have had a battle with our IT security organization. They just don't understand what it is to have Android versus iOS. And I know I've had some quality conversations about that in here. And it's trying to get people to understand the security behind it because they've never had it before. So when we talk about that digital transformation, we are fully in that, that path. And it's hard because you're trying to explain to an old IT security organization about all these new, great, wonderful things, and yet they don't understand the security behind it or what it would take to make it secure, so they're afraid of it. And the fear is honestly what's handicapping a lot of us.
Myckel, you're smiling like a Cheshire cat. It looks like you've got something you want to.
No, security is always going to be some kind of a hurdle, right? Anytime they're always kind of chasing us in terms of making sure the company is secure, the data is secure, the product is secured, et cetera. But for us, the mobile journey started maybe 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And where we took it is we ended up kind of picking off areas within the company, within the businesses, and said, okay, what do we want to mobilize and what's going to be the highest impact to the organization? And that's kind of how we drove our strategy to begin with. So at the end of the day, I was here last year, we said, look, we have about 10, maybe 12 apps. I think we're right around 30, maybe 35 apps at the moment, trying to, and in particular, in kind of, we've targeted every department to make sure we see a certain amount of impact to the organization. Yep.
All right, cool. So actually, let's maybe pivot there. I was going to maybe go a little longer on one other question, but in trying to develop a broader set of apps for a broader set of employees, like oftentimes, you do start with one team, and a lot of times that ends up being sales because they're the ones who can get kind of loud and vocal. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how do we identify what those opportunities are across the entire enterprise, because we know that we only have so many resources to deliver stuff, so let's make sure that we're doing the right things across the organization. So, Roman, maybe I'll ask you, because you said that that's kind of one of the roles that you're in charge of. So
Yeah, kind of. One of the things that, having been an architect, let me take that first question though too. How many apps do you have? I'm not sure if that's a good metric to use, because we divide up our mobile applications into 3 categories. We divide them up into the ones that are customer-facing or consumer apps, so B2C. We divide them up into the ones that are employee-facing, and we divide them up into the ones that are business-to-business applications as well. Some of you may have heard the term the API economy. We're starting to bring that kind of concept into the mobile app space as well. So we have, I believe if you count it out now at Allstate, we have about 7 or 8 consumer-facing applications. As an architect or a former architect, I know that's about 6 too many to have that are customer-facing. So one of the things we always do is we will pilot an app, see how it works, and then bring it back into the corporate single-view Allstate mobile app for consumers. On the B2B side, we have probably about 15 or 16. 3 or 4 of them are internally developed, and the rest are SaaS solutions that came with mobile apps. And then for some of our groups, we actually do a lot of white label work. So the Allstate Roadside Services Group, our motor club, actually white labels Motor Club for a number of car manufacturers. So if you're driving a Mercedes or a Saab or a couple of other cars, not GM and Ford, but we're really the motor club underneath those services.
cool. And Brett, how about you? Like
So this is my second time around the block on.
Yeah, you've got 2 stories to tell almost.
On doing mobile, yeah. So what I find fascinating about BCG is that because 70% of the people are on the road 70 and 80% of the time, it's impossible to know what their network state is going to be, right? So we break it out into 3 categories. We have excellent networks, no networks, and go-go. And if you're on a plane a lot, you know exactly what I mean, right? It's like a dial-up modem for 150 people in a tube going 700 miles an hour. And we have, the higher you go in the organization, so we're a big partnership, right? The higher you go in the organization, the more irrational the sensitivity gets on user experience. So our partners have 0 tolerance for lag, none. And yet they're the ones that are sitting in these metal tubes 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week, and they expect everything to work perfectly every time. And they also bill at really high rates, and that's why. So I previously did mobile at Cisco. Cisco was exactly the opposite. It's huge, like big technology company. They wanted to be really far ahead. They could care less if half the stuff was broken. I have the opposite problem now. Everything has to be perfect the first time, or nobody will use it, or they'll go and find their own solution. So we're taking a pragmatic approach. We tried some web app stuff. It wasn't very good. Adoption was really low. So what we're looking at now is every single way that we can eliminate friction in the user experience so that we get adoption. And in parallel, we have people, so we hire a lot of folks out of college. We go recruit all the big colleges. So we have the partners who have been here forever and ever and ever, and all they want is Outlook and Windows, and we have brand new people every single year, and they want to do all of their work on their phone. They don't even want a laptop, they just want a phone. So that's the dichotomy we live in, and we have to support both because they work on the same teams. And so that's the other interesting thing we're seeing in the innovation space is how can we cater to the old and the new at the same time? We can't get rid of the old, we have to have both. And there's a few solutions that sort of sit inside the Venn diagram, but not many.
And to tack on to what Brett said, I think what happens in a lot of our organizations too is that we have our C-level who's out of touch with how people work. And they don't see the value in the new technology. It was stated quite plainly, why would anybody want to create documentation or create a spreadsheet on their phone? Well, if you don't work that way, you assume that nobody else does it either. Yet, when we talk about hiring the new kids, all they want to do is work on their phone. They don't generally have a PC. They've done everything all the way through college. All their work is done on a phone, and that phone isn't this little tiny thing anymore. This phone is 7.5 inches. I mean, they're huge. So why wouldn't you work that way? But what we can't get over is telling our C-levels, hey, you have got to evolve too. Just because you don't want to do it doesn't mean that you're going to force policy down to everybody else. Because what it does is it forces the shadow IT, it forces them to find a workaround, and then you've got data leakage. You've got people putting in data in places that they find convenient, but it's not convenient for the company.
Right, yeah, no, that's a big challenge. We see that a lot, but yeah, I understand that one. Now, you've got an interesting challenge, though, in terms of, Brett was talking about some design constraints that he has, and we talk about, both Brett and Melanie were talking about the different types of employees, but mostly from an age perspective. You've got, at Flex, logistics, manufacturing, you've got people in the back office, all of which who require different types of experiences, and sometimes on different platforms and different types of devices. So as you're thinking about trying to figure out where do you place your bets, where do you make the investments, that's got to be a tough challenge for you. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so we do have 200,000 employees, and it's kind of broken down between what we call direct labor and indirect labor. Guys who are at the manufacturing floor handling the warehouse, the lines that are producing, and then you got your guys who I call carpet walkers who are inside the corporation making decisions and being collaborative in that area. So we've from a strategy perspective, we've actually broken it down into 4 pieces in our organization. One is kind of these legacy applications that we have to modernize, whether those are inside of the factory or whether they're outside of the factory. Then we have another kind of a category that we looked at, which was just mobile from ground up. Again, whether it's inside of the factory and outside of the factory, and with that, always keeping in mind the same issues that you have, right? Whether do you have enough bandwidth? Do you have enough reception for that mobile device to work? And a lot of those pieces we've made sure to think through that. So if we're going to have to cache a lot of that information and then sync everything back online when they do get to a better spot. So every decision in the process of, hey, we got to deliver this. Where is it going to be? Who's it going to have? Who's going to use it? We do that up front, right? And that has helped tremendously. Obviously, there's problems. It's technology, right? But that's kind of how we move forward in that space.
And where have you put a lot of the emphasis in terms of driving the productivity within the enterprise, maybe driving the opportunity to re-engineer a lot of the business processes that are happening? Is that more on the carpet walker side, or?
I would say we started in let's say in the corporate, right? So we started on the corporate side because it was easier, right? We knew there's bandwidth. This is where we kind of started our mobile journey, if you will, because there was a little bit more predictable model there in terms of we knew the type of devices they had. We knew who the target audience was. We knew they're driving around in a tube, flying around in a tube. But so we had a little bit more predictable model in that area. But then we slowly started getting into the warehouses and the factories and try to figure out how do we attack that field.
Okay.
Glenn, I would say at Allstate, we don't really treat mobile any different than any other initiative that we have. So we've got money set aside that's run the business money. We've got money set aside that's discretionary, business-funded project work. And then most of you probably have CEOs that are hot and bothered about the innovation word to a certain extent. So if they're real about it, you're going to put some money away for that as well. So we've got that bucket as well to pull from to look for new opportunities. And I encourage you guys to really go back and talk about if you're feeling like there's competitors nipping at your heels. I did a little quick run-up this morning and found out there are 537 insurtech startups across 53 countries, across 14 different types of insurance lines, all nipping at my heels, Farmers, State Farm's heels, to take a piece of our business. And my job at the company is really to make sure that out of those insurtech companies, Allstate's right in there with them, toe to toe.
Okay. All right, so let's, we've talked about some of this, but let's also talk about, as we've tried to build out mobile, and make, really move from the science project to something that's more scalable and mature, as mature as you can be within 5 years or so. Let's talk about some of the big challenges or changes that you've had to make organizationally. Now, Roman, I'm going to go back to you because at last month's ETC roundtable, you gave a good talk to everyone else. And by the way, if you do join, you can listen to the past episodes that we've had, of how you've had to really significantly modify and change your development process to accommodate doing things faster and doing things for mobile. You mind sharing that with the rest of the group here?
Sure. So most of you probably have heard about Agile and the ability to move your companies quickly. We really started down this road of, back in 2014, my team was one of the leaders in trying to get software out the door quickly for POC or market test type of activities so that we could measure and come back and change those products around. So we were doing a form of Agile. What was happening, though, is we were starting to early hear about concepts like DevOps. And in the DevOps concept, it's not just about the developers. It's also about the operations side. And some people have now changed the word to be DevSecOps or BizDevSecOps, so everybody plays in that game now. But regardless, at the end of 2014, I was standing in front of the leader of infrastructure at the time and telling him that, my team is delivering software every week or every 2 weeks, and it's taking 18 weeks to get a server built. It's taking 2 or 3 weeks to get a firewall rule pushed through the door. It's taking more and more time. And by the way, I'm getting tired of signing all these exception forms. So we're going to have to do something along those lines. And he looked at me and said, how long is it going to take us to move to a DevOps world and move my folks forward? And I said, well, conservatively, we're talking about 2 years, and I was being optimistic. And what he did was he said, we got to rip the Band-Aid off. And I give him credit for that because we really looked further into different ways to develop software. And we settled on using a methodology called Agile Extreme Programming. And for those of you who don't know what XP is, it's really about developers working in pairs. They must do test-driven development, and there's about 10 other practices that they do to really develop quality code as it heads out the door that is really usable by clients or internal employees. We also combine that with a platform as a service, and the two combined together really have changed dramatically the way we deliver software.
So I just add an completely different end of the conversation, but when I came into BCG, we had 2 teams that organically developed exactly the way you'd expect. So we had a team that did the desktops, and then at some point they inherited Office because Office went in the image on the desktops. And then you had another team that was basically directory, like the AD people, and messaging and mobility. So it was clear that there was like CC mail or whatever. They upgraded to Exchange 2000. They needed Active Directory, so those two went together. Somebody bought a couple of BlackBerries, and they tacked that on the side and said, here are the 2 organizations. And there was a little more nuance to it, but fundamentally that's what it was. And so I came in and I said, all right, we have to fundamentally change the mindset. First of all, mobile and the laptops are not different. They're exactly the same. Their form factor changes, but fundamentally we have to put these people together. We have to say that there is no delineation between a desktop and a tablet and mobile and the operating systems. And we all know that they're different and they're managed different and all those other things, but fundamentally that team is the same. And then we carved out identity as a distinct thing because I am a believer in no more VPN. I probably should make t-shirts for this, but I hate VPN in every possible way, especially on mobile. So we carved out identity because identity fundamentally is the new perimeter. So that needed to be its own thing, and we needed to scale that out. And then we built a team that Steve is now running called Productivity. So we took the Office people who were sitting in one team, and we put them together with the Exchange people who were sitting in another team. And so now you've got the front ends and the back ends together. And we've been able to go a lot faster since we put that model in place because you don't have the finger pointing and the support conversation about is this Outlook or is this Exchange. It doesn't matter. It's all the same team. Fix the problem. So we've tried to put the front ends and the back ends together. We've driven a pace of change that the firm hasn't seen yet, and we're lucky and we're blessed that we have the budget to support rapid change. But the hardest part is still the mindset. We still have people who think that this is a 2,000-person company and not a 15,000-person company. And that's the current change that we're trying to drive through is this is big, it needs to scale, but we have to continue the pace that we're going.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you, because at our little ETC Live last night, Melanie used some colorful adjectives to describe some of the challenges that she's had, so please share.
I think what has happened in a lot of cases is that we get into this idea that building is better than buying. And people look at it as, well, we have a technology like Azure, for instance, but we can just build an app, it's fine. And we spend probably 4 or 5 times more to build the same app that you could go in anywhere in this room, point to somebody and say, hey, I'd like to buy your app for, $20,000 or whatever, and put it out immediately. And it's this weird mindset of, well, if we build it, we know that we've created the security, we've created all of these hooks that we need to get into our back end and our API. And what we don't realize, though, is that the time, effort, learning curve, security, all of the things that go into it, when you could have just walked in, had a vendor come in and say, here it is, here's what we do, and no, we don't have the same security concerns, and here's why. We don't have that ability when we're building an application to say, Android is secure, and here's why. Because the first thing they're going to say is, well, prove it. Well, I'm not going to go out and pen test every single time we have an application update just because I wanted to change a icon color or a picture or something like that. But that's where we are. And it's frustrating because not everything needs an application. I mean, there are things that just do not need an app. You can get to it from the web or your internal browser, your secure browsers, as it were. They don't need a dedicated application. They just don't. So, and it's that mindset of how do you figure out which one needs an app, which one doesn't, how do you build versus buy, and then how do you move quickly? And moving quickly in an old organization like ours, and just a little more background on Altria. Altria owns Philip Morris. So we are very old tobacco. We are set in our ways. People have been at the company for 40 and 50 years, which is a mind-blowing thing, especially if you're in the IT industry. We've got people who are celebrating 30 years in IT at this company. I don't know how you do that. I mean, in the mobile field, we move every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
She never misses an opportunity.
Right there.
But it's really difficult to try to get them to see outside of their bubble. And when you're new coming into a company like that, to bring that innovation is always hard because they're like, well, how do you know? Well, I've been around, I've done this multiple times, and here's how it works. You're only looking at it through this small lens, but you don't see the world around you.
Okay. So one of the approaches that's important is Brett's approach of knowing that your organization can line up to the technologies you have. But you have to take a structured approach that says, if we're going to do mobile, we're going to look at architectures. And in my case, remember I said we segmented our architectures, and they're completely different for employee and consumer and business partners. As part of architecture, you look at security. And one of the things we do is we engage our security folks as part of the folks that do the pen test, for example. They're accountable to do the pen test. So they are at a position where they have to learn it in order to certify it and send it out the door. It's not the mobile team doing the pen test. In fact, you probably don't want that anyway. And then lastly, you want to start looking at processes around development. And as I said, we did XP, and then the deployment and support models that you have. You can't do anything without those 4 components.
Okay, so we've got a little less than 10 minutes to go. So I want to just pivot a little bit the conversation. We are the Emerging Technology Council. So let's maybe talk a little bit about that. We've talked about how we've started with the mobile as a science project. Now it's a somewhat mature technology. So let's talk about, but now we have all things like IoT and AR and VR and all these fun kind of things to chase. yeah, so it's, even as we're still building up the one foundation, now we're just throwing all this other stuff into the mix. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how do you decide as an organization which of these different things do you chase first? And how do you, evaluate when it's time to cut bait or whether or not we keep investing? So I'm going to actually start with Myckel on this one, because I know that your team has done a number of different things. Kriba, one of, talk about it, hard to pronounce last name, I'm not going to go there either. Okay. Shared in the ETC a video of like using AR and smart glasses, from I think Aether, if I'm not wrong. So maybe you could talk a little bit about.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't want to take credit for that because Kriba actually spearheaded the project. We ended up kind of looking into AR and VR, and obviously in this case we ended up going with Ether Labs, and did a POC on how do you leverage these glasses in the manufacturing arena to free up the hands, right? So we ended up building a product for the guys who are picking and pulling the material to go in and leveraging kind of their head tilting motions and hand gestures to scan in a pallet and pump that data into the system, right? And I would say it got a lot of traction, but we're still in the stage of refining that, right? So these glasses are still heavy. Trying to get them into the hands of the folks is still a challenge, and as well as trying to tie those back into the system is a challenge. But we're in the first stages of that happening. But we took that further with my team as well. We're now looking at it in terms of e-learning, in terms of say e-learning would be the key area that we're looking at right now, to try to walk somebody through the lines without actually being in the lines, in the manufacturing lines at the moment.
So who else is playing with something new that wants to shift?
Sure, I will. We're in the same kind of boat because we are manufacturing, and a lot of our stuff, we have equipment on our floor that's probably been there since the 40s and 50s because, well, it works.
Right.
But the problem is that 40s and 50s engineers no longer there or getting ready to retire, and finding young people who want to work for a tobacco company is very difficult these days. So we're finding that in order for us to train a new technician to come in and look at a piece of equipment that's been failing, they have to run back to an old book, and I mean books that are table width, dig through schematics to find somebody's handwritten note to tell them, if this is happening, do this. And these have been there for years. What we've talked about doing is that sort of augmented reality, HoloLens or something like that you can use, and you can be on the floor standing in front of the machine knows that you're standing in front of this machine, and you can see, a drawing, an outline of all of the different components in there. So when you open the door to that machine, now you can see what may be out of place, what may be wobbling, and know that by the touch of a button, you can pull up the schematic diagram along with the handwritten notes to be able to fix it. This is where the future is for us. Because we are losing the workforce, the aging workforce is just leaving. So if we can entice people with technology and an easier way to work, why wouldn't we? And some of those folks who actually work on the floor may want to transition into more of an engineer job instead of standing there monitoring a machine. But yet, we can't do that without proper training. And it's hard to get those people engaged, involved. And if you can have something that helps that, why wouldn't you?
I would say, I'm in a unique position where I get to take a look at a lot of startups that are doing a lot of forerunner technologies. I've been able to see some things that we can apply to the insurance industry early on and try to work with them. We've actually been working, for example, drones have gotten real popular now that we've got quadcopter versions, but we were working with drones back in 2013 to look at mapping rooftops and other capabilities like that. We've also looked at newer technologies around IoT. I think they mentioned, for example, Progressive has the dongle that goes in the car. Allstate has one too, and we have it in 2 million cars. But what we'd like to do is move away from that and move into just using the cell phone. The cell phone has enough sensors to let us know how fast you're going, which way you're going, where you are, how fast you're braking, actually even. And we can use all of that to create usage-based insurance to find out, maybe, for example, only insure you when you're actually driving rather than having you have the car sit 90% of the time and you're still paying for insurance on it. We'd like to be able to move into other capabilities, especially in innovation that's disruptive. We have Glenn mentioned our motor club, for example. We're actually Uberizing our motor club experience. You're able to download the app, which you can load for free, and not use it unless you really, not pay for it unless you really need it. But what happens is, today, a motor club works by dispatching to a call center first. The call center goes to a tow truck dispatch center, which then gets to the tow truck. 40 minutes to 2 hours later, a tow truck shows up, maybe just to give you a jump. So what we're doing is we're hiring Allstate rescuers in all 50 states, and if you only need a tire change or a jump or a can of gasoline, they will be able to come to you, and they'll bring that in under 20 minutes. So that's resulting in very high customer satisfaction, and that's an example of not just innovation that's a transformative or process improvement thing, but it's disruptive. We're disrupting the entire value chain around how the motor clubs actually work.
So I'll take one step back on the other side. So I worked for Cisco. You guys remember the CS? Hopefully not. Hopefully nobody bought one. Yeah, Adam Stein does. I'm not surprised. It was the world's best doorstop, right? This thing is awesome, and it was a heater, and it was our attempt at what we thought was low-hanging fruit, right? It was, oh, look, here's an iPad, but the iPad 1 doesn't have a camera, so let's OEM some giant plastic thing with a terrible battery and put Android on it for some unknown reason and try to sell that as a consumer-ish device, but only to enterprises. And I was in a bunch of the meetings before it was launched, and I'm sitting there thinking, this is the worst possible idea that we could do. We make routers. Why the hell are we trying to make a tablet? And it was like this thick. And then a couple of years later, there was a press release that went out, I think it was 2011, 2012, at Cisco Live that said that Cisco's internal BYOD policy, which is what our team did, was the primary reason why the CS died. And the primary reason why the CS died was because it was a terrible product, not because of anything we did internally. But that was one of those where we thought immediately, instantly, great, you can just undock the screen from the phone and take it with you and use it and plug it in later. And it was a total and complete disaster. But that's the flip side of the innovation thing, is you have to be prepared to fail. And we actually didn't fail fast enough with that. We tried to sort of push it along a little bit further than it should have gone. And of course, the iPad 2 had a camera.
And some of you may know there used to be a company out there called Palm.
Yes.
Did the Palm Pilot. They had the Palm Folio. I have one of those.
Well, it's like the BlackBerry Playbook.
Yeah.
I mean, you had them both out at the same time. I almost thought that Cisco and BlackBerry were in cahoots to try to get the most ugly device.
The worst tablet possible.
The worst tablet possible that had no features or functionality.
Yeah, I think we won.
So the comedy will continue later, because now we're just having a lot of fun. And we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to try and stop it here. But this is the kind of conversation that we love to continue to have at the ETC. We have a lot of conversations here, at ET6. It's an opportunity to continue those. And I just want to thank everyone for the time. Myckel, Melanie, Brett, Roman. If we want to take a question or two, it's up to you. I know we're on schedule.
We're going to go right into the
Okay, so we're done. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks,
Really
everyone.
appreciate your
Thanks,
time.